let's see how parameters can be used to pass values into function. The parameter name can be used to specify where the value will be passed in the function. Let's say we have a function, I will call it f, and let's say we have different parameters here. Currently we have name and last name. Normally what we would do, let's say the body here is not very important, but usually what we do, we just call out the function and we pass here Aaro and Loberg. It's caps for some reason. What happens here is that this one will be passed here and this one will be passed here. So based on the position. So the first argument will be passed into the first parameter. The second argument will be passed to the second parameter and so on. But we can change that. We can do so that instead of using the positions, we can use the parameter names here. So I can say that last name is, let's say, Smith. And first name or name Aaro Smith. Now what happens is that based on those parameter names, we can see that this value will get here. I will use another color here. This one will be passed here, and this one will be passed here. It works also with more than 2 parameters. So if I would have name, last name, age, location, then I can mix those up. But it still applies, it still, you still have to pass all the parameters which are defined here. So if I have a function with 4 parameters, I have to pass all 4 values into when I call this function. And usually if I don't use the parameter names, those are passed by position. So the first value will be the value for the first parameter and so on. But I can mix those up if I use parameter names. But if I already start with parameter names, I have to do it for the whole function call from that point on. So I cannot say that if I have age here, I cannot just put 17 here. So in this case, I would have to specify that this value is for the age. Or if I don't want to mix those up, I can just add 17 here. I'm not 17 actually. And those give the same result. So in some ways, if you read a code, it might be easier to understand if you specify the names of the parameters. You can even have the same order. I can even do that. Name is Ago, last name is Smith, and age 17. I can do even that, although the order is the same, but now if I read the code, it's easier to understand that, okay, this one is the last name. Otherwise, if I have too many parameters here, let's say I have a function with 10 parameters and I have a lot of arguments here also, and it can be hard to understand which one is the 5th argument. So I have to actually count, oh yeah, this is 5th, and now I have to read out the parameters. But if I specify the names, then by the looks of the code, I can already understand that, oh, okay, the value, I don't know, the location Tallinn is because I have to pass in the location or the hometown or something like that. So in some cases, we even though we don't have to or we don't want to change the order of the parameters, we explicitly say which parameters have which value. In Python, we can use default values for parameters. And if the parameter has default value and we don't pass a specific value into that parameter, the default value is used. Here is an example. I can modify the current example so that, let's say, the default age is 20. Now if I call this function without this part here, what happens is that whatever is done in this function, the name becomes Ago, the last name becomes Luberg, and the age will become 20. Now if I want to specify that the current age actually is 17, then I have to pass this value also. But this gives us an opportunity to have default parameters or parameters with default value. So if I don't want to pass the separate or specific value into this parameter, I can use the default value here. So here's an example. The function name is greetAnimal, and you can pass in the name and you could pass in the type. But the default value for the type is human. So if I just pass Ago there, I will see the greeting that says greetings Ago of type human. But if I say that greet animal Ago and squirrel, for example, then I would see that greetings Ago of type squirrel. So based on the whether the default value is suitable, I don't have to pass this. But if it's not suitable, I have to pass this value to this parameter also. Usually it's why we would use it is that in most of the cases, let's say in this example, in most of the cases we do greet humans. So there's no point to pass this human every time we call this function. So then in this case we will say that the default value for the type is human, but in some cases we maybe have some other creatures also in our program. So if the second argument is not passed, we will use default human, and if we want to specify, then we can specify adding the or passing the second argument for this function. Here's a more complex example, but the idea is the same. But in this example, we will have more default arguments or the parameters which have default values. And now there are several different ways how to call out this function. So if I call out the function with only two values, then only the first name and the last name are filled in, and all the others are used as default values, or the country will be Estonia, phone and email will be none. None is special value to specify nothing, basically. And the code basically prints out the name or prints out hi and name, then it prints out the location where this person lives. And then if the phone is specified, it will print out the phone, and if the email is specified, it will print out the email also. And now what I can do, I can call this function with only those two parameters. Those two are required. So all the parameters which don't have default values are required. So I cannot call this function without those two arguments. So I have to have two arguments. So there's another greeting for John Smith, but now we specify phone and email. And as you can see, I didn't specify country. So the country is still Estonia. So, but because of the parameter names, I was able to specify only specific parameters. I could give in the values also based on the positions. So basically currently the country will be USA, the phone will be this one here, and the email will be this one here. But yes, I can, especially with default values, default arguments, you often don't want to specify all those, or you just only want to specify one of those three options. Then you have to use the parameter name here. Or of course, if you only want to specify country and the phone and email are not relevant, then you can also write John Smith and Estonia or John Smith USA without specifying that it's a country. Then it uses the positions to pass in the values into the parameters. And those arguments which are passed to the parameters, those will replace the default values.